tools, after the marquee tools, lasso tools, is these ones here. They are the shortcut for these is W object selection tool, which is pretty damn new. If you're watching this in 2020, if you're watching this in 2030, it's been around for about 10 years. Quick selection tool, magic wand tool. Shift W will allow you to cycle through these, or you can get it from the toolbar over here. Let's check out the object selection tool. This one's pretty damn cool. There are two options for this. There's a rectangle and a lasso. Some other options, sample or layers. So if you have a blank layer, for example, you can still select the image below it. Enhance edge object subtraction, worth checking out as well. And all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to drag a rectangle over my subject, which is this amazing looking instrument, and it does a pretty damn good job. And you can try this with people or vehicles, whatever it is you're trying to select, and hopefully it will give you a good result. Now it's not perfect. I'm going to zoom in here with this, and you can see it's missing some areas. Cool thing about this is if I press shift and drag over those, Photoshop will try and fix them. I'm saying, hey, what about this area? And it will start bringing it out. Now it's not always going to be a winning scenario. You might need an area that you're going to subtract, and of course Alt will allow you to drag a negative for that, and it's a matter of sort of going back and forth, back and forth. If it's still not working, if you're still getting weird things popping out through there, again, you can try this with the lasso tool. It does the same sort of thing. It may be time to jump in with your lasso tool, which is going to allow you to make those negative alt selections or shift selections as required. You can just do the finishing touches for that and hopefully get a pretty good selection. So love me some of that. I love a good quick selection area. Areas like this where we've got this little negative bit, once again, you could try numerous different ways of doing that. I'm just going to go through with the lasso, and once you get the hang of it, it's pretty good. If you are working on a mouse that's on a really slick surface area and it's not getting much traction, do consider getting stuff that works as a mouse pad. Even a bit of A4, A3 paper could help you out. So doing this stuff can be a little bit strainful on your wrist if your mouse is not that great. Alright, I'm going to deselect that. Let's jump into the next tool. Quick selection tool, really cool. Quick selection tool, you'll notice here we have our cursor here. We can actually adjust the size of this. I'm going to use the square brackets for this. There are multiple options for changing your brush size. You can see it changing up here, but I do like the square brackets. It's nice and easy on the keyboard. I've usually got adjusting something on the keyboard anyway, so it's right there. And what this actually does is this allows us to click in an object and drag through and use some of Photoshop's magic to try and figure out what you're trying to select. So this area up here, I'm going to start. We want to try and avoid the edge, because if you go on the edge, it's going, well, I'm not actually sure what you want to select, so it's going to select both. But if you start in the middle of the object or area and drag outwards, you can see it's going to select there. Also, check up the top, sample layers. Again, if you are on a blank layer or a layer that you just still want to be able to select what's viewable, you can turn that on. And also, enhance edge can be quite useful. And then you can click and drag through. And as you drag through, you get a little bit of control over what you're going to select. So do this incrementally, and once again start from the inside and move outwards. It does take a little bit of practice sometimes to get it right. Now I'm actually hoping this is going to mess up somewhere along the line. In fact, it's not, so I'm going to make it mess up. I'm going to drag it out further than I want. So if I want to actually bring this in, what a lot of people will do is go, well, I made a mistake, let's hit Command or Control Z, step backwards. But the recommendation is, rather than doing that, press Alt to subtract and then start herding that thing back. And give it a few seconds so that Auto Enhance can catch up with it. And apparently what it does there is that Photoshop goes, okay, well that's not what you want, and next time when you do it, it's going to be more likely not to select that area. It's going to get a little bit more wise as to what you want. Once again, that is Alt, and you can drag that around certain things and get them to subtract. So this one is super helpful. Once again, not always perfect, so that poly lasso tool is going to be our savior for a lot of things. I'm going to deselect that once again, and let's jump into the final tool. This is the Magic Wand tool. Ooh, sounds fantastic. Once again, anti-alias, I'm going to have that turned on. Continuous sample or layers, once again, if I have a blank layer and I still want it to work, as you can see there it is there. If I have sample or layers ticked on, I'm on a blank layer, it's just going to select the entire layer. So, you know, decide what you need. So let's just get rid of that blank layer and let's jump back on here. The way that the wand tool works is it picks a color range. Wherever you click, it is going to select that color and a range, and it's going to keep going out. The range is based on the tolerance. The default is about 32, and it's going to, I'm clicking on this green area here, and it's going to select through that. Clicking on this gray area, it's going to select everything of that tiny point that I've selected there or around that, and it's going to start stretching out from there. Now, this isn't the best image to give you an example on this, but I will make it work by focusing in on this little gap here. So if I want to select this little gap here, note that I have contiguous ticked on. I prefer saying continuous, but let's go with that. And if I click in there, you can see it's going to select that little area. It's bleeding out a little. Now, I'm going to undo that. If I ramp up the tolerance, it's going to start stretching out. So it's looking for that color and a little bit more. So it's going to go further and further. If I ramp it up to its maximum, which is 255, it's pretty much going to select the entire image. If I drop that down to 1 or 0, let's zoom in on that again. We are going to select just that specific color within that 255 color range. So it's going to be very, very precise. So you can play around with the tolerance a little bit. The higher the tolerance, the more range within that color selection it's going to select. So you know, you can get a bit of play with that. So that's kind of cool. If you want to add areas to this, and let's see if we can find something else that's going to be interesting to select. Let's maybe grab this bottom area here. I can press shift and it will now select that as well. I can keep clicking shift and keep moving that out, stepping backwards now. So tolerance is good. Shift to add if I want to remove that, alt to subtract, and it can be a bit finicky because we are looking at, you know, these values, this range between our colors. So the other one I want to show you is this. So I'm going to do a quick deselect on that and do it again. Is contiguous. Now this is a really exciting one. If I want to get the background of this, what I could do is press shift and then click that and then click this area as well and then start building it from there. But if I have contiguous ticked off, it means it's going to select that color throughout that entire image or layer. So I'm going to click on there and you can see instantly it is selecting everything within that color range of the image. And that can be really useful if you've got a background that's completely different to your image. But in this case we're going to run into some issues because that color range is inside this image. You can see it's sampled some areas that we don't want. So I might press shift again and start growing this out to other areas as I try and select the background, but then I'm going to have to go back and remove other areas as well. So this might be done with the lasso tool. This is where the freeform lasso tool comes in pretty handy, and press alt to subtract if it's some big areas in the middle. But you know, be wary of what's going to actually work for your image. So all these tools are fantastic, but which one's going to work, which combination is going to be the quickest and easiest. So in this instance, if I went for something like the quick selection tool or the magic wand tool, if I look at this object has got a lot of quite complex things. The background, not so much. So I might actually be better off, rather than selecting the object, I might actually be better off selecting the background. So using the quick selection tool, I can zip that around pretty quick, and the background's quite stark, and that might be easier than selecting the object and doing that. Now the downside of that is now that I have the background selected, I can subtract that, but if I want to select that object and copy and paste it, like Command J, if I press Command J now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the background. So we need to get one of Photoshop's most important shortcuts. It's you can go directly to this as well, is the inverse. So use the selection tools to select the area that's the easiest to select. So if the background's easier to select the object, select the background. The object's easier to select and you want the background, select whichever is easier, and then simply go to select and inverse, and you're looking at Shift, Command or Control on PC, and I. So think I for inverse, Shift, Control, I, and that will inverse the selection. And now what I actually have is I have selected not the background but the actual object itself. So have that in mind as well. So Shift Control or Shift Command I for inverse. So that is actually the bulk of the tools as far as manual selection goes. There is some other tools as well, and I'm going to deselect this once again, and the tools I'm going to recommend that you have a look at is, first one is the pen tool. Shortcut is P for pen tool, and we've got pen tool, freeform, curvature pen tool, add anchor point, delete anchor point, convert anchor point. Of these, pretty much the pen tool, if we're using a standard photo image, is going to be useful. The other ones are kind of more for graphic design, logo based stuff, but this one can be useful for selecting images. Now it is also important to note that we do need to this is quite a complex tool for someone beginning out, and it does take quite a bit of getting used to, so it can take quite a bit of time. It is also important to note that there is another tool that you quite often need to use with this, which is the path selection tool and the direct selection tool. And what we're going to do with the pen tool is we are going to create either a shape or a path, and we can use that as a selection tool. The reason why the pen tool is actually quite good, I'm just going to use this to create a path, is that it allows us to create perfect curves. So Photoshop is essentially a pixel based or bitmap bit of software, although it does have the ability to use vector and vector shapes. Pen tool creates vectors, and what vectors are is essentially mathematics showing us, and we can create a perfect curve which is mathematically created. So if I look at this actual curve, zoom it in, we can see the pixels of the image, but that curve is going to be perfect no matter how far we zoom in, theoretically. So it's mathematics. So if you do require or are required to do a perfect curve, then this might be something that's useful, and it's also quite a good selection tool. The issue comes is that you need to learn how to actually create the shape and apply the curves, and usually it's a click and drag situation, and as you can see, I'm going to do this really hacky click and drag, and you can start building it. I kind of recommend if you do want to get to use this tool, which is well worth getting to know. It's used in a lot of software, particularly Illustrator. It's also used in After Effects. Is check out some tutorials on getting this working. It is slightly different than Illustrator, unfortunately. I'm just going to close this path off or just hit enter. Let's step back, and what we'll actually find is that path is going to be placed in a paths folder. So over here, so you can go to window, I shouldn't say folder, sorry, a window with paths. So window paths, I'm going to bring that up. Let's rip that off over here, and there is that path, and I can bring that back. So if I want, I can re-edit that. I can go to, say for example, my direct selection tool or my pen tool, and I can click on there, and there are all my points, and I can re-edit all of these points or add points using the pen tool. And if you press command, you can move those. If you press alt, you can grab the handles individually, and you can really define perfect curvature on your shape. So it's really useful. It does take quite a bit of time to master, and then once again, like we did by selecting in the object window, if you press command or control on PC and click in the thumbnail of that, that will select that, and then you can use that to delete, copy, paint, whatever it is you want to use. But in all honesty, unless you're really proficient with this and and you really want to spend time learning the proficiency for this, the bulk of what we can do with the pen tool, we can probably get away with the poly lasso tool. It's definitely not as precise, but it's pretty damn simple to use, and you don't have to worry about all the little shortcuts and moving handles and stuff like that. And you can get away with most stuff fairly quickly using that and the other selection tools. So there you have it. There's the pen tool. A couple other things I want to mention real quick is you do have some options up here in select. Let's get back to layers here. So if you go select, and you can also choose subject, and this depends on what your image is. I'm just going to click on there, and it's going to look at it, and it's going to go, this is our subject, so it's going to look for the main thing. So for people, whatever's taking up the main area of your image, that could be a really good one to use. Let's cancel out of that. So deselect, and there's also other things like color range. So if we bring up color range, what you can do is you can select on a particular color. It's going to give you a preview here, and you can play around with the fuzziness of that and push that around. And if it's got a really strong color, you can get it to choose that. So I can choose the green, for example, and I can play around with that. It's kind of better for things with very stark color, as for example this green. It's going to be missing a lot of the areas in that, so useful for some things, but for most of what we're going to do, it's probably not going to be all that useful for what we're going to do. Alright,